So, looking back on all of the videos I've made this year so far, I realized I haven't really reviewed a lot of the games that have dropped this year. I did the Trails Through Daybreak 2 review, but if we're getting technical, that came out, like 2023? So how about we fix that with me dropping a review of another Atelier game, this time the newest released, Atelier Yumia. A game that I had been anticipating ever since I had made that video talking about games that, I was anticipating. I was super excited for it. And a little while back, I had reviewed the demo and said the game was off to a very promising start. And I still stand by that fact, as I think the very start of this game was fantastic. However, the big question here is, what about the rest of it? Was this game able to keep the energy the start had, or did it crash and burn? Well, it's a little more complicated than just picking one or the other. But to explain, I'm going to have to get into the video, so let's end this intro and get started. So, to kick things off for this little review here, let's talk about the most obvious thing worth praising, and that is easily the graphics. Yumia looks downright incredible. Now, I went over this a bit in my demo review, but it was very easy to tell that ever since the Rising games, Gust has been giving these games much more of a budget, alongside utilizing a new engine for sharper movements and better looking character models. Makes sense considering how well it worked for the Secret Trilogy. And Yumia really shows how much they've learned how to use this engine properly. Character models are very well designed and move very fluidly in both cutscenes and combat. The several regions you end up exploring all look distinct and are quite memorable once upon your first visits. But personally, my favorite aspect of it was all of the little details they added in. Examples being pause and level up screens having multiple different animations that you could see. My personal favorite being the level up animation for Yumia, where sometimes she'll just fall down and then laugh. It's super adorable and charming. I am a huge fan of devs putting little details that add more to the characters in their games. Another personal favorite was the cutscene direction. Now, I'm not certain how many Atelier games have tried to do full action cutscenes, but out of all of the ones I've seen, Yumia is one of the only ones to do it, and frankly, it's probably the best there is so far. Especially the ones you see in the midst of battle, where you get to watch the characters be fully animated and fight each other. They look great, and I gotta give massive props to the team for making them as fluid as they were. So big thumbs up to the team for that. You guys did great. Have yourself some delicious chocolatey milk as a reward. Oh please, I insist. Right, where was I? Oh yeah, so with all the things I've been saying, it probably comes across like the graphics are my favorite part of this game. But in reality, nah, that actually has to go to the gameplay, so let's get to talking about that. From a first glance, the gameplay of Yumia is very much trying to build off the more action-oriented combat of the Secret Trilogy. And for what it tries to accomplish, I think it does a really good job. The combat feels immensely smooth and responsive. There were two aspects in particular, though, I think really stood out. The first being the range mechanic, where in battle, you can now basically choose whether or not you wanted to fight close range or long range. Each of them utilizing different attacks that vary from physical-based to magic-based. Using these in tandem, you knock down the enemy shields, I guess you could call them shields? I don't know, we'll call them shields. I doubt they're dick shields. Are they dick shields? I don't really know. What the fuck am I talking about? Anyways, once you knock them down, it leads to them weakening their stats, and you can now deal more damage. I love this because it actually incentivizes you to swap in and out of range. Not to mention that changing ranges from time to time can help you dodge very powerful AoE attacks to keep yourself in battle longer. Which, ties into the other thing I really liked about the gameplay, movement in battle. So one of the biggest additions to Yumia's gameplay arsenal was that you now had the ability to run around the arena and straight up dodge attacks. And it's really fun to use, not gonna lie. Not only does it get battles a lot more of a frenetic feel to them, as you have to basically run around the arena and dodge at the right time in order to not take any damage, but adding in the ability to dodge allows the developers to get a lot more creative with their battles, especially in terms of boss fights. However few there were in the game. I think the best utilization of it was the boss fight against Leonidas, this giant wolf dude that blocks you from getting to the final area. We're at the halfway point, he starts rolling around the battlefield, you need to move your controlled character around the field to see where you are so you have to dodge him. It's a great utilization of the system, and honestly, I kind of hope it shows up in future games, because I'd love to see this kind of combat system fleshed out more. Outside of this though, combat is very similar to other titles in the Secret Trilogy. 3 party members, swapping between them and the ones in reserve during battle, and mastering item utilization to keep yourself alive and do more damage. And, well, that's really all I have to say about the combat, outside of the minor complaints I had for it, which we'll get to later. So let's talk a bit about the alchemy now. To be honest, I'm a little mixed on my feelings on it. I definitely think they streamlined it a little too much, but I don't think it's as bad as some people say it is. It still has that fun feeling of being able to create absolutely insane weapons in the endgame, and the little animations they had were always a treat to see, so I can't be too mad about that, more mixed than anything else. Also, I love the aspect of being able to design your own area if you want. I think they could have taken it a little farther, but for what they got, it was pretty cool. Also, that more mixed feeling is probably the best way to describe how I feel about the open world, which admittedly I do think does a few aspects better than Ryza did, as actually being able to see where you're going was nice. Plus, these big areas are mixed well with the new simple synthesis mechanic, where instead of having to return to your Atelier after fighting monsters or exploring in order to heal, simple synthesis allows you to basically make things that you can take around, like bandages or magic flasks, so you can continue exploring without having to constantly go back to your Atelier. Plus, you can now put bullets in people. Yeah, so Yumia introduced the concept of just straight up shooting enemies to stun them now, which is not only an immensely hilarious concept of just Yumia running around and putting bullets in every monster she sees to kill them, but these bullets also end up coming in handy when you need to solve certain puzzles or activate little switches so you can get some more skill points and fill out the map a bit more. Oh yeah, they bring back the skill tree from the Ryza trilogy. Like the alchemy, it's a bit more streamlined, but I still think it's pretty good. Overall, it comes together in a very fun, if pretty flawed experience. Flaws of which we will definitely get into later, don't you worry. But for now, that wraps up all I wanted to say about gameplay, so it's time to talk about the story and its characters. Now, this was the aspect of the game I was probably the most interested in seeing about how I would feel about it. The demo had pitched this darker, more serious adventure, and I was interested to see if the entire game could keep up with that, and honestly, it very much did. I won't be going super deep into spoilers, as this game legit just dropped, but I have to admit, for the more serious narrative, it handles it rather well. So the basic synopsis of this game is that Yumia joins this group whose main goal is to discover the secrets of the land's lost kingdom, and while the narrative around that is very well done, I think the most interesting aspect of the story is how alchemy is treated. So as I play in this game, I've played around 5 or 6 Atelier games, and there's usually 1 or 2 ways that alchemy is treated in them from what I've seen. Either it's something that everyone knows about, and it's just part of everyday life, or it's this weird new thing that everyone's kind of apprehensive about, but comes around to it. In this one, you are literally treated like fucking Satan if you study alchemy. So, for the context here, alchemy is treated as this forbidden text that you're not supposed to be studying, or you get ostracized for it. And that's the dilemma our main character has to get over. Not a single person on the team trusts Yumia due to her being an alchemist, as everyone just assumes she's either going to cause problems or betray them and ruin their lives. And you really get to see how much that has an effect on Yumia, as in comparison to a lot of other protagonists, she's very soft-spoken and has much more of an urge to prove to everyone that she can be useful and that there's more to alchemy than being some threatening monster bomb. I didn't really know how to describe that better, so sorry if that sounds a little weird. Along the way, she has to earn the trust of her teammates and is forced to confront both the good and aspects of alchemy through facing the antagonists. Yeah, one thing I really liked about this narrative is that it does not shy away that alchemy can be just as much a good thing as it can a bad thing. It tackles something that this franchise usually puts in a very positive light and shines alchemy in a much more gray area, which leads to a pretty engaging story overall, something that is elevated by just how entertaining the characters are. Yumia has a very strong cast of characters, some of my personal favorites being the main character, Yumia, of course, the mercenary that joins the research team known as Nina, and my personal favorite being Rudger, this badass scythe wielder that starts off more rough around the edges, but goes on to care for the cast as the story continues. Also, let's be real here, that is literally just McBurn from Cold Steel. Beautiful. But the heroes weren't the only entertaining characters, as the villains were rather entertaining themselves. They had a strong amount of personalities that made them really fun to follow as well. I mentioned him earlier, but again, my personal favorite was Leonidas. He's just got this larger-than-life feel to his behavior that I always love seeing in characters, whether they be good or bad. I wonder if his voice actor has done any other roles in this franchise. If so, I'll have to play those games post-haste. And that's really all I have to say about the story and characters. So now let's get into my discussion about the last bit of praise, and that's the music. It's fantastic, plain and simple. I shouldn't be surprised at this point, though, considering that every Atelier game I've played up till now has had a fantastic soundtrack. Composed by a trio of artists known as Akiyuki Tateyama, Kujira Yuminie, sorry if I get this name wrong, and Kazuki Yanagawa. The legit dozens of tracks they've composed for this title were absolutely phenomenal, the battle theme in particular being my favorite. Genuinely happy to see that this game is once again continuing the trend of an Atelier game having a phenomenal soundtrack. With all that said, that is all of my pros. So now, let's move on to my cons. So I had a pretty decent amount of positives to say about this title. I think it does a good amount of stuff rather right. However, I also think it does a good amount of stuff wrong as well. And I think it's time we got to talking about that. I'm going to be skipping over the graphics section because realistically, I don't have anything negative to say about how it looks. So let's get into how it plays. First and foremost, let's talk about the biggest elephant in the room, and that's this game's severe lack of any sort of difficulty. Yeah, there's one major gripe I have with Yumia's gameplay. It's basically 90% of this game is so easily just rip dudes apart that you barely have to pay attention most of the time. You may have noticed that in the gameplay section, I skipped over talking about stuff like friend actions or counter actions, and hell, even your super mode that you unlock. And that's just because of one simple fact. The game's so damn easy that you barely ever need to use that stuff. I'm gonna be real here, I legit forgot Yumi even got a super form because basically nothing forces you to ever use it. Every single fight I was in, I could basically just slaughter all of them with my upgraded weapons and dodging. Which I'd like to point out, this movement system is actually pretty easy to abuse once you get the hang of it. Combine that with how abusable the alchemy system also is because of how being a lot more streamlined really doesn't require you to super think about what you make. But even if I have complaints with that, I think my biggest issue out of everything is just how easy it is to gain levels at the start of the game. You start at level 1, like you would guess, but by the time you're done with the first area, you're at level 40 if you've chosen to just fight more than maybe 10 enemies. It's that easy to gain experience in this game, to the point where you're just wiping out everything that isn't one of the major boss fights in literal seconds. What's even more bizarre about this design choice is that this kind of fast level up system doesn't really stick around once you get to the second area. You start leveling up much slower there, and you start to think to yourself, okay, so they balance this area more. But then when you get to the third and fourth area, you just go back to the really fast level up stuff. It's so fucking jarring. Just make me level up fast in the second one if that's the case. And it just makes the game immensely unbalanced as a result. Another complaint I ended up having was with the boss fights. Now, I think all the boss fights are pretty much amazing. They're easily the best parts of the game next to the continuing narrative. But one thing I've noticed about the boss fights in this game is that certain fights don't feel like they're built for this combat system, and that's mainly due to the AI, which can be so immensely frustrating that sometimes they will be really helpful and dodge all of the attacks through and through, or they'll just get their asses beat by the boss fights and you'll lose them and be forced to swap out to a party member, who, guess what, can also end up getting hit because they don't have iframes, so when they swap in, they just take some unfair damage. I can't tell you how annoying it was in the late game, where I'm doing everything I can to dodge, and my party members just sit there like dipshits and get the shit beaten out of them, to the point where I just wanted to tear my hair out. Thankfully, I was able to beat their asses because my weapons were OP as shit, but holy fuck, these AI partners needed some more fine-tuning. It's a great combat system, great, want to stress that more than anything, but it's definitely got some flaws that could definitely be worked out in a sequel. And funnily enough, even with all of these complainings, it's actually not my biggest gripe with the gameplay. I think my biggest issue with the gameplay has to be with the open world itself. Now, I mentioned before that I think it does a few things a bit better than Rise's open world. More than anything, it's nice to be able to actually fucking see where you're going in one map instead of just having everything being covered by clouds. But even if it is easier to get through them, that still doesn't save the open world from being immensely boring after a while. I appreciate the fact that you're trying to evolve this series, but I can only do 3 of the same puzzles so many times before I start getting tired of it. The puzzles you do in the open world are immensely basic. They start out fun and unique, but the further in they get, the more you realize how similar all of them are, and you just get sick of seeing them. How about I put it this way for a better explanation? In the first area, I thought it was great. I was having a blast. The second area, however, is where it started to wear thin on me, and by the time we reached the third area, I was so fucking sick of the gameplay loop. By the time that I hit the fourth area, I ended up only focusing on the mainline stuff, unless I absolutely had to go get something for a new weapon. It's kind of a shame because honestly, I can see a potential in a more open zone style for Atelier games. I just hope they're able to figure it out in the next couple of games because it keeps going. I don't think I'll be interested in doing any of the side stuff they push for these titles. Outside of that, I really don't have any other complaints with the gameplay, so how about we get into the narrative next? Not a whole lot of issues here either. I think everything was handled immensely well, and honestly, this may be the best story in the entire franchise out of the games I've played. The only complaint I really ended up having was that the main antagonist himself wasn't really as interesting as his cohorts were. You don't really get any interactions with him until the very end of the game, so he has no real time to build up any sort of relationship with the crew itself. Admittingly, it leads to a pretty underwhelming confrontation that, while having some pretty hype moments and a pretty solid final battle overall, just kind of leaves him as the most forgettable antagonist so far. With that out on the table, those are all of my cons. So I think it's time we got to my final thoughts. After going over everything that I thought worked out with this game and what didn't, I can definitely say it leaves me a bit more on the mixed side than I wanted it to. There's a lot to like, sure, but there's also a lot that definitely needs improvement. It's streamlined enough to where if this was your first game in the series, I could definitely recommend it to you without a doubt. But if it isn't, I'd say wait for a sale, especially since I really don't think this game should have been $70. But all in all, I still think it's a good game that I hope gets a sequel so it can improve on its shortcomings. And that's why my final rating for this game is a pretty solid overall 7 out of 10. And with that stated, we are finally at the end of the video. Thank you all so much for watching. Feels good to cover a game that actually came out this year again. So, might be doing it next week as well if all the script nonsense works out. And if you liked what you saw here, make sure to leave a like and sub down below. We're on the way to 1K and I think we can do it this year. Turn on the bell for some notifications for when my videos go up. Leave a comment down below if you want to chat about the video or just in general. And since I haven't really been promoting it all that much, go check out my Twitch and my Discord if you want to talk to me or any other cool people outside of these videos. With that said, have a good day, and I'll see you next time for some more RPG content.